Hello students, in this video we shall be going through a tactics based on pawn promotion. Basically pawns are considered to be the least powerful of all chessmen, right? A pawn has a value of 1 compared to 3 of knight or bishop, 5 of rook, 9 of queen. Pawn just has a value of 1 unit. So it's possible to underestimate the importance of pawns. But in real games, pawns are the soul of chess. Okay, once the pawns advance, first of all, they drive or kick away the opponent's pieces because everybody is afraid to exchange with a pawn. Secondly, the more a pawn advances, the more dangerous it becomes because if it comes very close to the final line, which is promotion, then suddenly a pawn can transform and become a queen. It can be as powerful as a queen. The weakest piece or weakest chessman becomes the strongest chessman suddenly. So that is why whenever a pawn comes close to the square of promotion, we have to be very alert and we have to seek different ways to make it promote. Okay, so let's try or let's go through the first examples of pawn promotion. So these are some tricks. There are thousands of different types of tricks which you can apply, but we shall be going through about 6 or 7 very interesting threads. Now in this position, if you are white, how can you win? If you promote the pawn directly, the pawn is very close to the final square, right? If you promote the pawn directly, black's bishop will capture. There is no win. Now, if you get smarter and if you say, okay, now I'll play bishop g7 and then promote. But even here, black will ignore. And once you promote, black will capture this bishop, this queen with the bishop, leaving you with only one bishop and king against king, which is a dead draw. Remember, a bishop cannot checkmate a lone king, but a pawn can. How? Because the pawn has the power to get promoted and become a queen, after which a queen can easily checkmate the king. Right? So here, bishop g5 doesn't work, g7 doesn't work, promoting doesn't work. Then what works? In this particular position, white has a trick, and that is the trick of playing bishop d4 and forcing this bishop to leave the defense of f8 square. Now white is threatening to capture this, and if black captures, we promote f8 without any hindrance. Now our queen will easily overcome black bishop. So this is how we win. First, by removing the bishop from defense of the promoting square. Okay, now moving to the next example. Here it seems the game is equal because both sides have one bishop and two pawns. And both white's pawns are blocked by opponent's pawns. Then how can white promote? Well, one thing to notice is a white's pawn is on the 6th rank, very close to the 8th rank, which is the final rank. And if it does, we will win. But how can white make this pawn move forward? Well, the easiest way or the only way to do this is by capturing the neighboring pawn with the bishop. Now this forces white to capture the bishop, and now white advances the pawn. One thing to notice is that black's remaining pieces are unable to stop the pawn from going to a8. Okay, the last rank. If black had this bishop, then this particular tactics would not have worked. I mean, white would have failed because the bishop could come here and stop white from promoting. Okay, but since black has this bishop, he cannot prevent white from moving a8. So this is how white wins. when our pawn is blocked, we unblock it by sacrificing and moving this pawn this side. Now there is a question. What if black doesn't capture the pawn? How can I move this pawn? Okay, no problems. White will capture this pawn in the next move, and we will have two pawns which will advance later. So this is the second way of promoting pawn. The first was, in the previous example, we saw deflection, removing the bishop, and this time it's destruction, where we simply destroy the opponent's pawn chain or system and advance our pawn. Now here is a related example. It's white to play and win. How does white win from this position, which looks almost equal because both sides have queens, rooks, and same number of pawns? Well, it's easy to find a win for white if you have paid attention to the previous example. How? This pawn is dangerously close to the queening square or the promotion square. White captures this rook, sacrifices his queen for a rook. When black captures the queen, we advance the pawn and promote in the next move. Now it's important to note that none of black's piece is able to block this pawn. If black goes queen c8, still we can advance the pawn because the pawn is backed by the rook. Black captures, white will also capture this, and black is checked and checkmated. So the winning move is queen takes the rook, which is on b6. Now let's move to another example, and this is very interesting, slightly different from previous one. It is white to play, and you have to find how white can win from this position. Okay, this looks like a very easy position, right? The pawn is almost promoting. And what is there to think about? Well, you can still promote the pawn to queen, but the point is, after promoting the pawn to a queen, black's king doesn't have any square to move. All the squares are guarded by white's pieces. And you may recall, a mate without a check is a stalemate, which means it's a draw. So white gives up his winning by carelessly advancing this pawn and promoting to a queen. Well, the best move is he should advance the pawn and promote to a rook. The reason is now the black king can move here. This is a rook. We are not threatening the king. Now, after the king goes here, we can checkmate the king. So this is one instance of deliberately not taking the highest award, that is the queen, but instead going for the second best chessman, that is the rook. We call this under promotion, where a pawn doesn't promote to a queen, but we take something else instead of a queen. And there are some positions where it is good to under promote rather than taking queen always. Almost in 90% situations, or even maybe 99% of situations, promoting to a queen is the best because queen is the most powerful chessman. But this is one rare example where we have to promote to a rook in order to win. Yes, white does have alternate ways of winning. He can play a move like king e7, allowing this king these squares, and then promote to queen. Yes, but a rook promotion meets black in two moves. Moving to the next example. In this position, it is white to play and win. Black has a queen, white has a rook, white also has a pawn. Now here, if white promotes the pawn to a queen, black will play queen e2 check, or even queen f7 check. even this is a good move. It's check, and it also threatens the rook. When the king moves, black will take this rook, and the game is drawn because both sides have equal material. There is nothing much to do. Okay, so even queen f7 is good enough, because even here we are checking and we are attacking the rook. That is why white has to be careful. He is on the verge of winning. He has to make the best move to win. And the winning move is, we will under promote the pawn to a knight. Now it's a check. Black doesn't have time to play this or this check to win the rook. We are checking the king and immediately removing the opponent queen. That will leave us with an extra rook and knight against king. It's winning for white. Okay, so this is another example of under promotion. And finally, this is the last position for today's class. Everything looks equal, but you have to find a win for white. If you have gone through the lesson very attentively, this should be easy for you. White to play and win. Okay, the win would be based on the advanced h5 pawn. I mean, this pawn, which is quite advanced. So white is already thinking of how to promote it to a queen. And it is actually possible if white captures this pawn. It seems incredible because the knight will capture the knight, and now the pawn is not as advanced as it was in the previous examples. But still, white advances the pawn with the threat of capturing the knight or even going further up. The knight has to move, the pawn moves further. Now we are promoting, and black has no way to save himself from promotion. White wins. Although the pawn was here on 5th rank, but still black could not prevent white from promoting. But whenever you play such sacrifices, allowing your pawn to advance, you have to be very sure that your opponent is unable to stop you. So this ends our class today. We have learned how to promote, the different tactics we can use for promoting our pawns and winning game. Of course, there are many other situations where you can promote, but this was just a glimpse of how dangerous our advanced pawn can become. Goodbye and keep watching.